Hi, everybody. Good evening. It's Thursday, October 13th, 2016. Tonight's broadcast came to me for a few reasons. Number one, when I read this article, I think it was published in the New York Times several months ago, about this idea about talking about the relationship between connection and addiction. It resonated with everything that I've ever believed about what we do at Evoke and the way that we train our therapists and staff. That's the first thing. The second thing is I had just visited a program that I think embodied this so very well, where all of the activities, all of the culture of the program did so much to create this connection, to create this place for passion, for purpose, for these young men that are struggling with addiction. And in that context, many of them, some of them suffering from very severe addictions, were thriving. So I took those two things together, and I wanted to do something to talk about this tonight. I want to talk first of all about what we've thought about addiction. What has been, I think, historically, our culture's concept of what addiction is. It talks about in Alcoholics Anonymous very clearly this idea that early thought was that it was a moral failing, that it was something that demonstrated a weakness of character for the people who suffered. I think sometimes even those kinds of thoughts creep into our current day culture. We'll look at somebody with a severe addiction and we'll think about them and talk about them in terms of weakness. I think to the average layperson or the person who doesn't have a lot of experience, education, or exposure to addiction, I think that's an easy thought to have. So part of our history involves that kind of thinking. Of course, in the 1980s, in 90s, we embarked on this war on drugs, this idea that it was something to be fought against, something to fight with. We thought about it in terms of a criminal model, right? We fought foreign powers that were bringing drugs into our country, and in America, we imprisoned, we jailed people who were using drugs, selling drugs, right? That was our idea. Our thought was, if we could punish them, then it would be a deterrent. It would be a deterrent to them, and it would be a deterrent to others who might consider using drugs. That's simple behavioral thinking, not too crazy. Makes some sense. And part of this comes from that idea, that reality that how much we love our addicts and how much it hurts us and pains us to watch them struggle through addiction. And so we want anybody to stop them from doing it, even if by force. So it doesn't come from a negative place, it comes from a positive place, and from a place that on one level makes some rational sense. We turn our hurt and our sadness into anger. And we impose this model that in this country we still practice, we still support, but we're starting to question it and move out of it. So that's kind of how we thought about addiction. And there's some original studies that go back to studying rats and learning to study rats' behavior around addiction. And what they did is they filled up water with heroin and cocaine, and they put them in rat cages. And they watched how the rats reacted to them. They gave them the choice between regular water or drug-laced water. And what they found was these rats basically became obsessed, compulsive, addicted to the drug water, the drug-laced water, and drank it till they died. That was their behavior. And the idea was there is this medical chemical hook in the drug, right? We know what happens in the brain. We know how drug use limits the brain's capacity to produce dopamine. It deadens it. And so we become addicted to it because when off of it, our brains aren't able to produce the chemicals in our brain that give us a sense of well-being and a sense of pleasure. So we need more drugs to do it. So the theory would be that if I gave all of you heroin, cocaine, and asked you to use it for 20 days, right? Use it all day long, and then I took it away from you. The theory, this model would suggest that all of you would become addicts. But Bruce Alexander came along, he's a researcher, and he looked at these old studies and he noticed something about them. That all of these rats were sitting in these cages alone. And so his idea was to redo these studies and to create what he called the rat park. And I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. He changed the way that they look at it. You know, when we look at these kind of ideas with people, the research looks back on what happened in Vietnam. In Vietnam, 20% of our forces were estimated to be using heroin. And when they came back to the United States, the theory would be that they would all be addicted to it. But in fact, as they were followed by researchers and studied, they saw that 95% of them got clean after they returned without formal treatment. They re-engaged in their lives and they got off the heroin. So what's happening here? What's happening with this phenomenon? We saw it in the rats. We see it in this unfortunate human study that we had with Vietnam. And that's where Bruce Alexander comes along. He developed this idea of the rat park. He said, what else were they supposed to do? In response to this perceived shortcoming, Alexander created what we call the rat park, a cage approximately 200 times larger than the typical isolation cage, with hamster wheels and multicolored balls to play with, plenty of tasty food to eat, and spaces for mating and raising litters. And he put not one rat, but 20 rats of both genders into the cage. Then, and only then, did he mirror the old experiments, offering one bottle of pure water and one bottle of heroin water. And guess what? The rats ignored the heroin. They were much more interested in typical communal rat activities, such as playing, fighting, eating, and mating. Essentially, with a little bit of social stimulation and connection, addiction disappeared. Heck, even rats who'd previously been isolated and sucking on the heroin water left it alone once they were introduced to the rat park. I think that is a profound finding, profound discovery. And so what he did was he introduced activity, he introduced purpose, he introduced community, he introduced fun, and in rats, we saw it disappear. I used to say years ago that it's not going to work for people if they just have one reason not to use. People use to death even though they know it's going to kill them. When you give them information around the destructive effects of drugs and alcohol, they don't necessarily stop. But if you have a handful of reasons, a dozen reasons, many reasons, your job, your passion, your family, if you feel connected to those activities, bonded to those people and activities, then you have more reason. You have a reason, a purpose to get up, a purpose to live. So what do we learn from the rat studies, the rat park studies? We learned the importance of bonding. They needed something to bond to. And human beings, if they feel isolated and alone, will gravitate toward a chemical that gives them a sense of well-being, gives them a sense of okayness, which, by the way, is a fundamental outcome, quality that we experience when in a healthy relationship, a healthy, attached, connected relationship. So if we don't have that, we're likely to seek it in these other ways. That could be through chemical usage. It could be through sex addiction, gambling, other things. Could be looking for those feelings that we're having a difficult time finding. We learned that the disconnection was from life, from living. I think this is why AA and NA work so well, because they don't just provide a theology, a doctrine, right? An idea. They provide a place to belong. They provide an identity. They provide support, encouragement, connection. Right? It's more. We have to look deeper at those meetings, at those groups. That when people walk in there with their history, they feel connected to others with similar histories. They tell their story over and over again. They get a sponsor. They eventually become sponsors. And all of that gives them a context where they fit in, where they belong, where they feel a sense of well-being, a sense of okayness. Passion and purpose. I think when I look back on my work with addiction, my work with mostly young men, some young women in addiction, I often have thought about this idea that you've got to find this passion. You've got to find something that you love, that you care about, that means something to you. It can be in academics, it can be professionals, it can be recreational, it can be service, it can be something that you feel passionate about. So reintroducing a context where there's passion and purpose to these rats and to our clients is a part of recovery. Like I talked about, a sense of well-being, a sense of feeling okay that comes in relation. I've talked about, I'm going to say this very slowly and clearly because it's so important. One of the greatest contributions we can make to anybody, maybe most particularly our child, is to be able to see and hear them. That ability to see and hear them comes from a sense of our own being, our own selves being okay, but provides for them a sense of that they're okay, and creates a sense of an ability to be resilient towards life stressors. So seeing and hearing and connecting to children provides them with a sense of they're okay and a sense of resiliency. And so when that lacks or is absent, and the opportunity provides for some of these other activities or chemicals, people are inclined to seek after that. And then they can get into recovery. They can get sober when they start to understand that this spiritual, social aspect of the disease, and then put things in place to repair it. That's why we have them work on their war stories. We want them to tell the story. What were you getting out of it? What did you love about it? What did it give you? Can we find other things in your life that can give you that without all the negative side effects? That's why in drug recovery, we often don't talk a lot about the drug itself. We talk about this connection, this sense of fitting in, this sense of feeling okay. Right? This is an emotional disease, a spiritual disease, a social disease. And so we treat it in those areas. And then the outcome is this new commitment, this one day at a time commitment, this awareness that in order to stay connected to those things, I need to give up this thing. It's not easy, but I can because I have these supports. They talk about this story in Portugal. Portugal is one of the countries on earth that has decriminalized all drugs. They had a severe drug problem for many years. 1% of their population was estimated to be addicted to heroin. That's staggering. And so the prime minister and the opposition got together and they talked about, what are we going to do differently? We can't become this country with this increasing problem and addiction. We've got to do something. So they talked about this idea of decriminalizing drugs. But what they did was they did something beyond that. They took all of the money that was spent on jailing, investigating, all of the money that was spent on the criminalization factor of drugs, and they put it into creating jobs, creating places where the people could go to work. They would incentivize employers. If you give this drug addict a job for a year, employ him for a year, we will pay half their salary. And then it gave addicts a reason to wake up in the morning, a sense of accomplishment, a sense of belonging, a sense of being needed. And they didn't necessarily pour the money into traditional treatment, but into the concept that I just mentioned, and it made a dramatic difference in the amount of addiction in their country. So what we learned is that this is a problem about being in a cage. Being in a cage that feels cold, that feels isolated, that doesn't fit us. Addiction is an adjustment to living in a cage or an environment. We all have predispositions at various levels to this, but then we have exposures, stressors, traumas in our life, a sense of isolation. And then we stumble upon some of these behaviors, some of these chemicals, and we find a way out. So part of the idea is to deepen the connection. I'm going to talk about what we can do as families, as parents in this process, and what is our work. But the idea is creating an intervention to deepen the connection to others. The message from all of us is to the drug addict. You know, we've been, the people who talk about this say that we need to write not war cries against drug addicts and drug users, but love songs. We need to send a message that we love you and you're not alone. And that's so hard to do. And I'm going to talk about that. It's so hard for those of us who love an addict to love and stay present at all with them, right? The classic example of intervention, and some of you have seen the show Intervention, some of you may have even been involved in intervention, is to get all the people around that care about the addict and to say, you better go to treatment or we're all going to cut you off. Right? That's our model. And what this model suggests is that we find a way to stay connected to them, find a way to stay present with them. to learn how to connect. The problem is that it hurts us too much. It's so hard, like I said. But let's talk about a few things we can do. We can learn to listen. That's why communication skills are such an important part of our curriculum, and almost all addiction and recovery programs is learning how to listen, learning how to be present, assert yourself, and listen. We can replace lecturing with empathy and understanding. We can learn to see ourselves in the addict. I've heard great lectures on this idea where therapists model for family where they meet with their young adult addicted daughter or son and have lunch with them and try to stay connected. Try to get out of the mode of fixing them or correcting them or teaching them. If boundaries start to get violated, they take care of themselves. If they're asked for money for other things, they're allowed to take care of themselves. But so many people have a history with addicts where they feel so betrayed and there's so many injuries of trust that they just want to cut them out, and that makes sense. So we need to, we in this process, we will own and deal with our anger and judgment, figure out how to deal with it. It's hard, and we're going to need support. We're going to need support. That's why you're going to need Al-Anon. You're going to need therapy. You're going to need Codependents Anonymous and Families Anonymous so that you can get taken care of, so you can go to a place where you belong, so that you can develop more capacity to figure out how to be there for the addict in a way that is healing for them and still okay for you. That's what this work is. Part of it, I thought I was talking to somebody today about this, is looking at the longer story. Right? I think sometimes, I know we as parents, we get impatient and we think every moment is a crisis that needs to be resolved. And when we forget that this is a long book with many chapters, I can't tell you how many times I have parents of young adults say, it's over. It's too late. I wish I had this information when my son was younger, or I don't know if I can make a difference because he doesn't live with me. I've shared with you, I had a 70-something-year-old woman at a parent meeting the other day talking about her 40-something-year-old son and talking about what she was learning at the parent meeting and how she was going to use it with her son. I've told you the story in my late 30s, early 40s of the difference my mother made to me when she made an amends on more than one occasion for things that happened when I was a kid. It was the last of a healing experience for me in a couple of really important areas in my life. So it can make a difference. Look at the longer story. Do what you need to do to take care of yourself. Do what you feel like you have to do as a parent to intervene. If, nobody, including me or any therapist, can tell you what to do, because losing a child is the scariest thing that can happen to us. And try to have some perspective to understand this is a long book and you're only on one chapter. In the end, your recovery is the key to developing the capacity that you need to be able to provide connection for your loved ones who suffer from addiction, right? This is work. People that are married to alcoholics, people that have children that are alcoholics, this is not going to go away. This is going to be something you learn to deal with, and go get yourself right. Do your work. Make your journey your project. And when you do that, you'll be able to provide one of the elements that we believe, from what we now know, are part of the cure, part of the healing in an addicted person's life. It is at least our contribution to the process. And we know that some of them might not change. And we learn to accept that. We learn to come to terms with that. We learn how to be in relationship to that. But all of that takes work. All of that takes us doing our work and getting grounded. All right, Stephanie, I'm happy to take any questions if any came in. I think there was one that I saw. Al-Anon provides connection for the person who is not using, because addiction is a family disease disorder. Or this is what I have found in my personal experience. I think it's important and essential that all of you talk in terms of your disease of codependency. I think it's important for me to talk about that to you like that, and to talk about that to my children like that. Absolutely. Al-Anon provides a place where that's why people come to the parent meetings. Right? That's why some of you come here. You want to talk, even though this is me just talking to you. You want to talk and be in a room with people who understand you, with people who can finish your sentences, not with people who judge you. I was just talking to that same person I was talking to today, and she was describing this. A mother was saying she's finding it hard. This was just today, and I've told this story regarding other clients in the past. She's saying, I'm finding it hard to talk to other people about children, about marriage, because the things they say don't make sense to me anymore. And they used to make sense to me. So finding our people, and many of those people in those rooms have stories that you can relate to. So thank you for putting them in there. And I think it's just as important, just as critical, just as helpful and essential for family members to get into their own recovery, whatever that looks like for them, their own recovery, as it is for the child struggling with addiction or mental health to get into treatment. As a recovering alcoholic myself, I have empathy and compassion, not anger or judgment, for my son. However, I sometimes wonder if I'll ever be free from the mistrust and the fear of losing my son. I go to Al-Anon, but I still struggle so much with this. I just want to say amen. It's I don't have the answers. I don't know how. If I could take it away from you, I'm sure if you could take it away from me, you would. It's not that we go to Al-Anon to conquer, right? We go there and we get fixed. We go. You're saying the perfect thing. That's your battle. Your battle is to figure out. That's what I talk about in my book. Is how to be in relationship to somebody who's struggling. Who am I? Who are they? What's my relationship to them? And what's my relationship to their problems? And those are the right questions in that order to be asking. And it's hard. It's work. Most people don't even ask that. Most people get defensive about this and say, this is not my problem. It sounds like you're blaming me, right? I've never had these problems. I don't do drugs. But people who do what you're doing, who accept the journey as their journey, who accept the fight as their fight, they're the ones that are doing the work, that are being a part of the solution, that are helping. And it's not easy. And gosh, I can't imagine having a child who's a practicing addict not having a fear of losing him. Or even somebody who's had a serious addiction and who's in recovery not having the fear of relapse. I can't imagine that. This is the struggle. And the important thing is, and I'll say this very clearly, that's why you go to Al-Anon, because they're supposed to help you with it, not him. That's the rule. That's the job. That's the deal. There's another question coming in. How can a person deal with old friends who don't get it and talk freely and proudly about milestones in their life with their children, which will never be my milestones? I have mourned the loss of who my daughter was, but when she talks about her daughter, well, I'm assuming friends talk about their daughter who was my daughter's friend, it still hurts so badly. I've distanced myself, but can't break the friendship as we live on the same block. It's hard. I said to this mother earlier, and this is the same thing I would say to you, is it's important that you find your people. And I think distancing yourself is one way to take care of yourself. One way to do it is to sit down with them and have a conversation and try to explain to them what they don't know. And there's a very good chance that they won't hear you. There's a very good chance that they won't listen, that they'll be offended, they'll be upset, they'll try to talk you out of it, they'll try to teach you what you don't know. And I guess what I can say to them and to you is, I suppose they're lucky in some ways to never have had deal with the pain that you've had to deal with. But at the same time, I think what it means to be a grateful alcoholic, what that phrase means is it means that you've had the opportunity to learn something through a process you never would have self-selected, but a process that is a spiritual and emotional liberation, rebirth. So you could try talking to them, distancing themselves, In the end, we can't change everybody else. We have to learn that it's our responsibility to take care of ourselves, even if sometimes taking care of ourselves means that we can't be in a relationship. I've told the story that my therapist told about a Buddhist teacher that had said to her one day. Someday, I think, she said, sometimes I think in order for you to grow up, you have to kill your own parents. Emotionally, spiritual, she means, like let go of their expectations of you. And my therapist responded by saying, I think you have to kill everybody. And, and so part of our work becomes learning how, and sometimes we end up having the capacity that we can sit and listen to them and understand they just don't get it. And it doesn't affect us the same way. But we need to find people. For me, that's my therapist. My therapist is my weekly grounding. And there are some people in my life, and you all, actually, that can be that kind of support for me, that know what it's like to struggle. But finding people who can hold us, contain us, understand us, get us, listen to us, that's an important work, for sure. That's why Al-Anon can be a place to find more people than just one therapist. All right. The play is October 26th, just under 2 weeks from last night, actually. So the opening night gala and then breakfast at the Vogue. I think we're all closed up with the breakfast, but if you still want tickets to the gala, you can. OnGodArts.org, you can find out about our play that's coming out based on Willer's therapy. It'll be in New York for a few weeks later this month, and then it will tour the country next year. The intensives and workshops, I have a couple of the January and February ones are tentative, but these are the next few coming up. I'm also doing an Oasis Heroic Journeys for families this weekend, so I'll be doing that. The upcoming workshops, if you haven't signed up for the Cascades one this weekend, I'm sure it's probably too late for you, but there are the upcoming ones there. We're going to take December off for both the intensives and the workshops. We want all families to go to 6 of these meetings. That's our request, that you go to 6. If nothing else, you know what it's like to walk into a room where you feel uncomfortable and vulnerable. You'll feel many of the same things and have many of the same thoughts that your children had when they walked into our program. So please go to 6 of these meetings. Here are the upcoming parent support groups in New York City coming up next week. New room. Los Angeles, notice that the daylight savings ends the previous night. We're going to have that Sunday so that you don't have to worry about traffic. Potluck. You should have your invites in your inbox tonight. They got sent out tonight. The Bay Area the following night on Monday the 7th. Atlanta, we don't have the details for the hotel. Toronto on the 12th. There are the details there. So email Stephanie at evoketherapy.com or RSVP for more information. Remember, all of these webinars now and an additional one each week will be put on a podcast. So please go to either SoundCloud if you have Android and search Evoke Therapy Programs, or go to the podcast app on your iOS device and search Evoke Therapy Programs and subscribe to our podcast there so that you can listen to these anywhere. They'll just pop up on your screen on your podcast or SoundCloud subscription. And we also are on Instagram and Twitter, Facebook. You can find the Second Nature Alumni Foundation on Facebook, our blog. Our pursuit trips are for young adults and families, high adventure, therapy light. This is a perfect example of Rap Park. This is an opportunity where it's not the deep talking psychodrama, psychoanalysis. It's just learning to find yourself through connection and passion and activities. My book is available on paperback and audio. You can also buy it on the Parent Alumni Foundation book page on Amazon through the Amazon Smiles program. A percentage of the proceeds goes to help people who can't afford treatment. Also, recommended books from my therapists are there. And finally, I don't know if there are any last questions. I will be doing a webinar next Tuesday, October 18th at 7 p.m. Mountain on locus of control. This relates to depression, relates to a sense of self-efficacy and self-esteem, and I'll take a lot of my work from one of our 2 mandatory readings for our clients, which is Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, a wonderful book, a book that I quote several times. It actually is quoted on the cover of my book. So Tuesday, October 18th, 7 p.m. Have a great evening. I hope these points of contact are helpful. Take care, and I'll talk to you next Tuesday. Bye-bye.